flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. Go ahead and call the roll.
Trustee Spurling. Here. Trustee Lee. Trustee Hines. Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Bond.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum this evening, so we'll move on. Public participation. The first one, as usual, we have our public comment period. If there's any member of the public that's here this evening that wishes to address the board, this is your opportunity. So come down to the podium and introduce yourself. I think we need name and address if you can.
I'm ready to sign dinner ready.
There you go.
My name is John Binky, commander of Montgomery Post 7452. My two comrades here are William, and he's the quartermaster, and Rob, my junior vice. And what I'm here for is to make a presentation to the Montgomery Police Department in support of our big thunder run we had here 13th of September. And the police allows us, they shut off the road here from Mill to Webster, and they had something like 275 to 300 bikes parked up and down the street. And Big Thunder, they had their own people that parked the bikes, ran security. Rob ran some security for us, and it all went pretty smooth. Now, the money that's raised by the Big Thunder run, Midwest Shelter for Homeless Veterans, they get roughly, this last year, $48,000. The Sal Veterans Home, $150,000. Mantino Veterans Home, $57,000. Hines gets $51,000. And POW MIA issues, that's their main concern, is for POW and MIAs. And then they get about $64,000. Honor Flight they donate for the veterans that go to D.C. from World War II and some now from Korea. And they donate $6,000 for that. And various VFW functions, stuff like that. But this is their book, which I will give to you also. You can take a look at it. And now for Mr. Dan Meyer, if you come up here, please, I'd like to make a presentation to the Montgomery Police Department in support of Operation Rolling Thunder, presented to Montgomery Police Department. If I get the light on here, I'll be able to read it. For meritorious, distinguished service in furthering the aims and ideals of veterans of foreign wars in the United States by the Montgomery Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 7452, in support of our Rolling Thunder. We appreciate all the effort you did to the street down there.
Gentlemen, thank you, and thanks for coming. Appreciate it. All right. Enjoy.
Thank you, man.
Yep, enjoy.
My name is Linda Olson, Linda Passetti Olson, and I live at 2239 Brentwood Avenue here in Montgomery. I know that the Montgomery Road traffic backups are on everybody's mind these days, and I wanted to come down and say that I have talked to many people from that area, and myself, I've gotten caught in that traffic, and it's really important that we do something, and I'm really glad to see that Montgomery is addressing the issue. I don't know what you're going to do with it. I'm not a traffic consultant, so I don't know. Seems like a traffic light or maybe turning lanes there on Hill and 30 would be helpful. Hill and Montgomery Road would be helpful. I'd also like to draw attention to another really bad backup area that I'm very familiar with because it's right outside my subdivision. I live just off of Orchard, and you cannot turn right out of my subdivision you cannot turn left out of my subdivision for 2 or 3 hours in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the evening. At the rush hour, it's just so backed up, it's dangerous to even go out of there. If you're turning right, you can get out, but turning left and go south on Orchard is just impossible. It's caused accidents. I myself had a fender bender up there last year, and I'd like to see something addressed on there. I know that you're addressing lights. You've talked about the lights on Orchard and 30, and I think that's an important thing. If I could add one more thing to that, that's very important to me. I think we really need crosswalks across 30 and across Orchard Road. There's a lot of people from that subdivision that walk, and they walk back and forth. Going across 30, it's like playing Frogger. I can't tell you how dangerous it is. And if anybody wants to go to the west side of Orchard and use that nature trail, that path, that's very dangerous too, even at low traffic times. So if we had some crosswalks and some, some way to get across that street safely, I think it could really help. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I completely agree with you on the Orchard and 30. Spent a lot of time, some would say, complaining about that intersection, anybody that'll listen. Just this week, we drafted a letter and sent it to IDOT to request that they put that intersection in their next 5-year plan. And we'll keep requesting that and keep talking to people until we get that intersection fixed.
Thank you very much, Matt. Do you know if they're even thinking about crosswalks?
Pete?
They're in the process of doing a Phase 1 study for that corridor, and they haven't finalized it. They're also doing an interim study to look at just the intersection, and we haven't seen any of the results of that. But typically, they do look at pedestrian crossing at those intersections. So I would suspect it would be in there, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. When would I be able to find out?
Well, as soon as we get a draft report, we'd certainly be willing to forward it to you. Other than that, we're not in, it's an IDOT jurisdiction, so they're doing the study, so we don't have direct access to it.
Are we going to share that with Kane County? With Kendall County?
Well, Kane and Kendall.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
And outside, we do have 5 public hearings tonight, but if you are here for any of the other items like Montgomery Road, she mentioned that. If you're here for that this evening and would like to address the board, now would be the opportunity, because we don't take public comments during that action item. Actually, it's item for discussion. So if you do want to address the board on that topic specific or any topic, now's your opportunity. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on. Like I said, we have 5 public hearings. We're going to take all of these individually. Before I get going on the first one, do you have any introductory comments? Or do you want to take the first one?
Just simply as an overview of all 5, and then, like you said, we'll have to do 5 individual public hearings. These are wording adjustments to the yellow freight, or yellow transportation, SSA number 12, and then the Montgomery Business Center, SSA 34. This had been talked about previously about 7 years ago, but now with the pending development of Montgomery Business Center, there's the need to set up the SSA. The other 3, O'Reilly, Speedway, and Michaels, these are all obviously new developments that have just recently been completed, and this is a requirement of the Kane County Stormwater Management Ordinance that each property has an SSA in place for the possibility of the need for the village to come in and do maintenance on the stormwater management system. So, thank you.
And until such time, the levy would be 0 on all of those, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And the actual verbiage for all of these special service establishments and amendments, we've approved that previously, I think, correct? Or we've seen that?
Yes, you saw that, I believe, back in July. Maybe it was August. Excuse me. It was August. You saw that wording at that time. This is the requirement of a public hearing.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll take the first one, which is item B, public hearing on the expansion of special service area number 12 for yellow transportation. If there's any member of the public that wishes to address the board on that topic? Hearing none?
Give it to me for a moment.
All righty, go ahead.
Thank you. Just, I want to note for the record that we did receive an email communication from the owner of the Frelk Farm property, or rather from their attorney, I think it's an estate, but their attorneys, objecting to not the expansion in terms of the size of the SSA, because that is being expanded, but also, as Director Young indicated, the language or the scope of what could be covered. They presently object to that. That is their right, and I just wanted to note that for the record. We'll be looking at their objections and seeing if there's anything that we can address with that.
All right, hearing no other comments, we'll close the public hearing on item B. Moving on to item C, we have public hearing on the amending of Special Service Area Number 34 for the Montgomery Business Center. And I'll open the public hearing if there's any member of the public. Going once. Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. Moving on to item D, we have public hearing on the establishment of Special Service Area 38 for O'Reilly Auto Parts. I'll open the public hearing. Any comments? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Item E, public hearing on establishment of Special Service Area 39 for Speedway LLC. Open the public hearing. Hearing no comment, we'll close the public hearing and move on to item F, public hearing and establishment of Special Service Area Number 40 for Michaels Corporation. Open the public hearing.
Can I just get a clarification on what it means to be included in the special service area?
Yeah, certainly,
My name is Andrew Schmidt from Michaels Corporation.
certainly. Who wants to?
You want me to do it?
Sure.
Sure. Rich, is this a backup? Yeah. SSAs are required for stormwater maintenance and other kind of generalized property maintenance issues by the King County Stormwater Ordinance and by Village Ordinance. And so what happens is, for the private developments such as yours, what happens is we create it, and it provides basically for a dormant or a backup SSA. And what that means is that really it will be enacted and it will sit, and nothing will be done with it unless and until you, and I don't mean you literally, but the owner of the property, were to fail to upkeep the property. If that were ever to happen, the village would send notice, and then if, again, nothing happened, then the village would levy a tax on that property to do that maintenance. But assuming that the property owner keeps the property in conformance with the stormwater ordinance, et cetera, that would never happen. So it's really, it's an insurance policy.
So as long as we maintain it, the tax levy,
Never happens.
yeah, that answers.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Any other comments on item F? All right, hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and move on to item G, which is the 2015 audit presentation by Brian Lefevre from Sikich. Justin, do you have any introductory comments on this?
The board should have had in your boxes a copy of the financial statements. At this time, I will turn it over to Brian Lefevre from Sikich.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. On behalf of Sikich, I'd like to thank the president and the members of the board for inviting us to present some brief comments on the CAFR resulting from the audit of the village's financial statements for your year ended April 30th, 2015, and answer any questions that any of you might have. Within the document, there's an introductory section, a financial section, and a statistical section. In the introductory section, I bring your attention to the third page, Roman numeral 3, which is the award that the village received for its CAFR for the 2014 fiscal year from the Government Finance Officers Association. It's the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, and it's the 12th consecutive year that the village received this award, so you should all be commended for that. It's the highest level of financial reporting within the local government industry. The second section of the report is the financial section. The first page of the financial section is on Sikich letterhead. This is where we've given our opinion on the financial statements. In order for us to give an opinion on the financial statements, we're required to follow two sets of standards. One are the auditing standards issued by the AICPA, or the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants, And those procedures tell us the type of procedures that we need to perform when we're conducting our audit. The second set of standards that we follow are the financial reporting standards issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB. And GASB sets the rules for what the financial statements need to look like. Once we follow those two sets of standards, we can then give an opinion on the financial statements. And we're pleased to present an unmodified opinion. And what that means is that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, free of material misstatement. And this is the highest level of opinion that you can receive on your financial statements. In addition, this year, there was also a separate single audit of the federal expenditures of the village. This year, the threshold for expenditures of federal funds was $500,000. Next year, it'll be $750,000. And the village had a significant federal program this year in the drawdowns that you took on the IEPA loan. Namely, you had $1.68 million in federal funds, which were then required to be audited in accordance with the Federal Single Audit Act. That separate document will show you that we provided an unmodified opinion on internal control over financial reporting and on any laws and regulations that could have a material impact, meaning we didn't have any findings or exceptions. Also, we gave a clean or unmodified opinion on the compliance over each major program, with the IEPA program, loan program being the one major program. As I discussed with Justin prior to the meeting, there is a final piece related to the filing with the federal government. Unfortunately, the website that they have for that filing is currently down. And so all single audits, essentially, of all local governments and not-for-profits are basically on extension. We're following that on a daily basis, and we'll be in touch with the village and complete that filing of the single audit reports. Just past the independent auditor's report, you come to the last document that I want to review with you, which is the management's discussion and analysis. This document is on its own separate page numbering MD&A 1 because the village prepares this and it gets inserted into this document. This serves as the executive summary of the overall CAFR. The CAFR is a lengthy document, has a lot of information in it. The starting point for reviewing the CAFR would be this document, and then you go from there. We review this after the village prepares it and make sure it's consistent with the GASB standards and the financial presentation themselves. It does a very good job of explaining some of the whys of the financial statements. Just one comment on the overall financial condition of the village. Usually we look at the general fund to kind of show the stability of the village's operations, and fund balance has remained stable, as noted in the MD&A, with a fund balance of 5 months of expenditures. So a healthy fund balance position. Now, next year will be a significant change in the financial reporting that you see in this document. The reporting for pensions, so the police pension fund and the IMRF pension fund, the accounting is changing for those. So right now you have a financial statement that shows long-term obligations of the village that are fixed in nature, like a general obligation or a general obligation alternate revenue bond. Next year we're going to see items that are not fixed in nature, but rather over the life of individuals as they work towards retirement in either IMRF or the police pension plan. Those net pension liabilities are going to be reported on the financial statements. So your financial statements will look a lot different. However, this is only from an accounting standpoint. The way you're funding those plans will not change, and there's nothing that changes that portion of the budget and appropriation process. In conclusion, the audit went very smoothly and according to plan. In fact, we had no recommended adjustments to the financial statements. So staff, led by Justin, should be commended for that. And we received all the information we needed on a timely basis. I'd be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? I know it's a lot of data to pour over, but if you have any questions in the future, you can pass those on to staff or Brian. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Enjoy working with the village.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll read the items and entertain a motion for approval. We have minutes of the village board meeting of September 28th, the building report for September of 2015, accounts receivable report for September of 2015, accounts payable through October 8th, 2015, and the cancellation of the October 20th Committee of the Whole meeting.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Call the roll.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Bond.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Heinz. Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
And that carries 5-0. Thank you. We do not have any items for separate action this evening, so we'll move right on to items for discussion. Item A, we have the liquor license fee survey. With that, I think I will ask Zolfo for an update on that.
Certainly. I'm bringing this back from a previous discussion. I present this to you so you can take a look at it. I want to give you time to think about it. Just checking back to see if there are any that, as a group, you feel we need to adjust. I know one we talked about was the catering, the Class L license. We had another discussion about the Class G versus Class L license, and the attorneys have made changes to the Class L based on the discussion. We're waiting to bring it to you until we have this discussion, because if we're going to change the amount of the license also, then we want to put that in at the same time. So if you'd like to adjust that one, we can, or if there are any others you feel need to be adjusted. You can see that it's kind of a wide range. I'd say we're pretty much in line with Yorkville most of the way. Some of the others we're a little low on, but I'm not sure if it is really that important. It's not a large revenue item for us. So,
Just for clarification purposes, the catering is $1,500 in addition to the $1,250 for the restaurant license?
yes, if they have to get both of them, then it's $1,250 and $1,500 if they have both licenses.
What are the percentages for catering? As far as, or is there a certain percentage of alcohol that is related to food, or?
Not at present.
Okay, thank you.
What is the thinking behind requiring the 2 licenses for a restaurant that wants to cater also? Or, let me put it a different way. If a restaurant wanted to offer carry-outs, would that be considered catering or just carry-out?
No, it's just carry out.
All right, then that was my concern.
And the catering portion of this references coming to Attorney Anderson's house and serving alcohol, not
Never going to happen.
not bringing food to your house. That's completely separate. It's if they're serving and selling the alcohol.
Correct. If you want to be a caterer and you don't care to serve alcohol or even offer it, this never comes up.
Okay.
All right. Any thoughts on the fees?
I think it seems like they're right in line with where they should be.
Is there any interest? I believe there's interest in a catering license currently, isn't there?
We have some people that have catering licenses currently.
I've looked at this, and I think I commented on this last time. The catering license for us is more expensive than any really of our surrounding municipalities. I wouldn't want to put a damper if someone decides that they want to do some sort of catering. If they're only doing 3 or 4 events a year, then it gets, you divide that, that's $500 per event. That may be cost prohibitive to certain businesses. I'd like to see that lowered a little bit, maybe fall in line in the maybe $900 to $1,000 mark. But I think everything else seems fine.
All right.
Any other comments in support of that, or?
I'm supportive of reducing it.
I would be okay with that as well.
All right, make it 1,000.
I was just going to say, I'd say put it at 1,000.
All right. We will make that adjustment and bring the ordinance back to you then.
Excellent. All right, we'll move on to our last discussion item, it looks like. Item B, which is Montgomery Road Phase 1. This is a discussion of alternatives for the Montgomery Road S-curve. And with that, I will turn it over to our engineer, Pete Wallers, for discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. You may recall, on June 22nd, Kane County came out and gave a presentation on the status of the Phase 1 study, which is the preliminary engineering for the improvements that are being proposed on Montgomery Road. The focus of that evening's discussion was options for the Montgomery, so-called Montgomery S-curve, which we're all, I'm sure, familiar with. The county and their stakeholder group and the consultants that the county had working for them had narrowed the options for the S-curve improvement to two alternatives, alternate 1 and alternate number 3. And I don't know, Jeff, if you can just.
Want to see
go over.
3 also?
So those were the two alternatives that were held back, and the county then requested that the village board weigh in on a preference for either one of those alternatives. And you also may recall at that meeting, staff was concerned in general with the two choices, and we had some questions that we wanted to go through with the county to try to clarify a few things that we were uncertain on. And in the packet this evening, you can see follow-up information, including emails and other things that centered on some of the questions that we had. And I would say the two issues that were of concern to us were, and it's on all the drawings, you can see properties that are outlined in blue. Those are proposed properties that the county believes need to be acquired to construct the improvement. So on this alternative, you have these two properties, obviously you have this road connection, and then there's a property over here. So you have a number of properties that are affected. Similarly, on the modification to the S-curve that shows the roundabouts, there's even more properties that are impacted, including these single-family homes along the Montgomery S-curve on the west side. So we were concerned, whether or not which alternative was obviously the best, but also, to what level do we think acquiring property is appropriate for improvements there. So we went back and said, okay, really how dangerous is the S-curve in its current configuration, and is there another alternative here that we could possibly use to maintain the S-curve in place and not have such an impact to properties. And some of the questions in the emails, if you follow them, we pointedly asked whether or not the road is on what's called the 5% designation from IDOT, which means basically high accident intersections or areas of roadway. It's not on that 5% list. There's no location on the corridor that's in that list. Talking with the chief, there are times when Montgomery S-curve is a concern, primarily in the wintertime when we have storms and it's difficult to get salt and respond quick enough. So you do have, issues there because of the nature of the curves. But if you accept that, it's not, I don't think it's, and I'll let the chief speak, but it's not considered a high location where we're of real concern in the village. I mean, we have other intersections such as Orchard and 30 and Douglas and 30 that are way more of an issue from us for accidents. So we kind of challenged, the premise that, all these improvements were being done to improve safety on the intersection. No doubt that they would, but the question becomes, is the cure worse than the disease in this case? So we're trying to wrestle that down. So that's kind of what the staff had been working on, is the consideration of the two alternatives, and whether or not there's other things that can be done to improve the S-curve safety, but maybe minimize the impact to the local residents. I mean, that's our real concern, is that we're impacting, I think, too many properties on the corridor. So this evening, we just want to have a discussion on this topic. We realize we've sent a lot of information to you, and we're not asking for any action, obviously, and we can have as much follow-up discussion as you would all like once you've had a little more time to digest it. But we want to get, the concept out there that there are potentially alternatives. And I'll just touch on a few things that we can talk about. And Jeff, if you go back to alternate 3, because I think it's a good illustration. When we were discussing this at staff, one of the items that was raised by Justin Van Voren was, could this radius at the end of the roadway be modified so that the home that's impacted right at the corner here could be eliminated, that impact could be eliminated. And I actually had gone back to a memo that we wrote back in 1999, and I think there is the option to change that radius and probably minimize the impact of that home. So you might be able to, and the other thing that was pointed out by Justin is, do we really need this interim connection here, or can we live with maybe modify and make a connection back here, make this a four-way intersection? So if you do that, then you eliminate another impact to a property owner. So now we're down to, 2 properties. Now, that still may be too many, but my point is, by making some minor changes to the design, you can impact the number of properties that are impacted. So those are things that we can recommend back to the county. And Jeff, if you go to back to alternate one of the things that drives this issue with the impact of the houses is these big roundabout diameters, which have to be able to accommodate snow plows, fire trucks, things like that. So the question that staff raised, do we really need the roundabouts? Could we do something along the curve that perhaps widens the road? Maybe we do some traffic calming in these locations, but not roundabouts. And I think there's opportunity to lower the road profile, and perhaps you could improve safety, maybe not to the extent you could with the roundabouts, but make it better, widen it, but then reduce the impact of the homes, again, along this area. So I think either alternative 1 or 3 could be modified to reduce impact to properties. And that's where the staff kind of got to a point where we wanted to discuss it with you all, because we were a little surprised, honestly, that as many properties were impacted by alternate 1 to the extent that they thought they had to be acquired. So, we think that there might be a workaround there, but I wasn't sure, we weren't sure what the general preference of the board is, if you have any, and, because there are certainly benefits to both alternatives. Straightening the S-curve, we've been talking about that. Like I said, I wrote a memo in 1999 talking about straightening the S-curve, and at the time that we wrote it, and Chief Myers will recall, Chief Schmidt was here, and we had a lot of accidents on that S-curve at the time. But after we looked at straightening, and it was expensive, so it wasn't something that we were just going to run in and do. But what that led to was then a dialogue with the county to work on modifications to the S-curve as it stood. We put in skid-resistant pavement. We put in better lighting on the S-curve, and those things helped reduce accidents. And then Public Works has been extremely responsive during storms, and I think that's had a huge impact on maintaining safety along the curb. But you still get it, and in the safety, one of the memos that's in your packet, there's a counting of all the accidents that have occurred on the S-curve. You can see that there's some side swipes, other things, and there's no question that it poses a challenge to drivers as you go around the S-curve, because you have school buses and other things, people stopping to make left-hand turns there. You have driveway access, things like that. So it's not an easy area. We've been living with it for a long time. It is a county road, as we all know. The Phase 1 will set the table for any of the actions going forward. So it is important that we weigh in on whether we like alternate 1, alternate 3, modification of alternate 1 or alternate 3, or we simply don't want to weigh in on it and let the county decide, what to do. So we have a number of options that we can follow here, but we thought this would be an opportune time to get some dialogue started with the board.
Thank you, Pete. Doug?
If we left it the way it is there an alternative to, like this, not this option, option 3 stops access all the way at both ends, right? That's going to be capped off. There's no access unless, with Justin's suggestion, eliminating the interim road. Could we cut off Third Street access there, and they would be forced to go around, and it would eliminate that intersection that's in the middle of the S-curve? Would that improve safety?
I think that limiting access on the S-curve would improve safety. I'd have to look a little closer at the accident data to see how many were really attributed to that before I would definitively say that. But as you drive, and I drive that almost every day, you know, you just notice what's going on. And it definitely sets up, I mean, it sets up opportunities for problems, for sure. So if you eliminate it, it's not going to hurt you, whether it's, you know, how much of an improvement it makes from an accident standpoint, I can't say.
I think that might be a school bus route on Third Street as well.
That's correct.
I actually have a couple of questions. In terms of the stakeholder meetings, do we know if all of those property owners were involved in those meetings?
I don't know. I would suspect that they weren't, to be honest with you. I don't really know for sure. I wasn't at every stakeholder meeting, but I was at some of them. And I don't recall, I don't know.
The ones I was,
Find out.
yeah, the ones I was at, I don't recall a large number of homeowners from the area. It was mostly other entities, the, you know,
Well,
Park District and,
The first open house that they had was in October of 2013, and actually trustee Youngerman and I were there. And the only property owner that I talked to and that I know of that was there was, they lived right there in Arbor Ridge that backs up to the area. I don't know if any of those other property owners in there were at that meeting, and that's why I'd like to know how involved those folks were in this process, because they're the ones being affected. You know, they're counting on these properties potentially for their retirement. You know, these are their nest eggs, and if we're saying, yes, go ahead and do this alternative, we're hurting them. We're hurting the property owners. So I have a really hard time actually with either alternative that we're looking at. My other question would be, so Engineer Wallers, you were there as our representative for the village, and then,
I was there.
and Jeff? Okay. Yes? I thought I heard extra. I did see MEDC was on there as well. Okay. Right, and the problem is if people get that notice and they don't pay attention, we're looking at construction potentially, let's say it's 10 or 15 years down the road, and then they're going to say, well, what happened? Who decided this? Why do we have this now? Because they missed something here. And that's my concern with if the property owners really are not aware of what's being considered. The other comment I would have, when I looked through the accident information, it seemed to point a lot to ice and wet pavement. Well, in my opinion, that's part of winter driving. You slow down. You slow down when it's icy and it's wet out, and you slow down on the curve, and you're supposed to slow down on that curve anyway. So I just, again, I'm having a really hard time favoring either one of these because of the impact on the property owners. So that's my weighing in on this.
Thank you.
I have a couple comments, if I may. First off, I'd like to thank you, Engineer Wallers, for your time and effort, because I know that you were aware that displacing people out of their homes was a concern for the village board, and I appreciate the time and energy you've put into this, and I think the entire village board does. I echo what Trustee Sperling has said. I can't support any alternative that's going to put someone out of their house. If we go to these people and they know in 10 or 15 years and hey, they have no problem with it, then that's fine, but they've at least got to be made aware and have their opinions known. I don't know, this is difficult for me.
And Pete, could you perhaps highlight what it is this study is? And if we choose or choose not to endorse a single plan, what are we looking at in the future here? What's the next step?
So the way that generally projects are, major transportation projects are addressed these days is to do what they call a phase one. It's a three-phase process, phase one, phase two, phase three. Phase one is what they call the project design report, which essentially tries to set and go through all of the issues of the corridor or whatever you're studying, identify the final geometry, so whether it's alternate 2 or 3 or whatever you choose, and establish all of those things, goes through all the safety data and comes up with recommendations, whether it's a 4-lane section, a 2-lane section, a 3-lane section, whatever. So that's kind of what we would generally refer to as preliminary engineering. They'd also lay out areas where they have stormwater management, drainage issues. It's kind of a very thorough document. Sets the table then for the second phase, which is final design. So the people that do the final design, phase 2, they would take the project design report and they would use that as a guide. And then there's usually information in there that has to be followed up or has to be refined. So for example, depending on how we weigh in, those types of things might be in the project design report that we may say, whatever it might be, change a radius because we don't feel that the way the project design report was finalized is appropriate, needs to be looked at closer. Those things can be added as well. Not unlike what we're talking about with the phase 1 for Route 30 when we're talking about lighting at the intersections, that we're generally on board with lighting, but we'd want to get more information in the final design cost before we would commit our resources or whatever we want to weigh in on. So phase 1 is preliminary, phase 2 is more detailed design or the final design. Those would be the construction level documents, and then phase 3 is actual construction of the project. This road is a county highway. It is, the first phase was a joint effort, primarily the county, but the village put in, I believe, $70,000 towards this study. So we're partners with the county. I believe the county's goal is to improve the roadway, but would also like to see a jurisdictional transfer of Montgomery Road to Montgomery. Now, that's another discussion that we have to have at a later date, but historically, when jurisdictional transfers have happened, normally the county will do a phase 1, do a phase 2, build the roadway, and then after the roadway has been built to a high-level standard, then it would be turned over to the jurisdiction, and that's been the process but been used in other parts of the county. We're not even close to having that discussion yet because we're not through the phase 1, and we really haven't talked about whether the village is interested in a jurisdictional transfer either. But I'm just trying to give you the broad picture of how there's other things here that may happen. So the county would like to finish their report, and they could elect to, well, I guess it depends on how we want to weigh in on the curve as to how they're going to finish the report. But then based on that, then they would make a decision, I think, and have a discussion with the village whether or not we want to move forward into phase 2 and what's going to be the position of the village relative to what's going to happen next. So, because I think in theory, there's a lot of alternatives here, and there's probably no end to all permutations. But as one of the residents just pointed out, the intersection of Hill and Montgomery Road has problems or is congested. Well, there's also options to do targeted improvements, not unlike what we're talking about at Orchard 30 to get the intersection done first. You can always come back and then work on the corridor. So there's all those opportunities as well that can be factored in. So kind of a long-winded answer that maybe didn't answer the question, but the process is phase 1 is preliminary, phase 2 is final, and phase 3 is construction. And typically, the reason that you do that is in order to secure federal funding, you have to go through that 3-step process. And as you go into final design, then you start having meetings with the Federal Highway Administration as well, because you may ask for either, you have to get the design, the final design approved by them. So if you propose, let's say, something that doesn't meet the Federal Highway standard, you have to request a design exemption, which is fairly common because a lot of projects are constructed within villages or cities where you have to make amends to the, you can't always have the perfect geometry. You have to make some adjustments to make it buildable and get the majority of the benefits. So the feds have been fairly receptive to reasonable requests for, you know, design modifications. And, you know, for something like the S-curve, I think that's how you would approach it, is to try to get some design modifications. Other things that come into play with right-of-way acquisition are the shared use paths that are typically associated with the new projects. And as we've seen on Route 30, by having that, it's an additional 10-foot or 8-foot, you know, path that needs to be constructed, which takes a lot of right-of-way. So those are things that would influence, you know, how much land has to be acquired. So those are things perhaps that we could request to be eliminated, you know, or maybe there's an alternative of including a bike lane as opposed to a separate shared path, so.
Okay. Stan?
I had a question in that regard. Looking at the map, I see a green bar for proposed right-of-way, and I see a reference to a bike path. Does it overlap with the green bar that's right-of-way, or is it on the other side of the road?
Are you talking about alternate?
I think I'm looking at alternate 3.
Yeah, I think some of the designated right-of-way there is for also for embankment, because that roadway is going to be elevated through that section. I'm not exactly, I'd have to take a look at the drawing to answer that.
The pain points on this stretch of road for me are at both ends, where the traffic problems are, exactly, and where it joins with Douglas. Are they part of this solution, or are they connected to this solution in any way?
The study limits are Mill Street to Hill Avenue, and so they will address those two intersections as part of it.
Kind of looking at the eastern end and the western end as separate pieces, but it's all part of the,
I think that's what's troubled me all along. I feel like we put the tourniquet on the wrong arm, because the real suffering is happening.
they're just, I don't think there was as big of issues with what they were proposing to do in the eastern half, and so it didn't require as much discussion. There's
Fair enough. Now, does action on this improve our timing and likelihood of the other 2 improvements?
That's a tough one to answer. I don't think I can. I mean, there's so many different priorities that the county has, and I don't know how this would rank in their hierarchy of. I think we fare a better chance of going to the next level if we have an approved Phase 1 document, because that generally sets the basics, you know, for the next level, which would be the Phase 2 improvement. So I think it helps us to have a Phase 1 that's approved, certainly.
So kind of the opposite of your question is, the longer it takes us to do what we're going to do here and for them to finalize the report, it just means the longer it will take for any of these improvements, generally speaking. My biggest concern, well, it doesn't sound like we have a ton of support for either one of these alternatives. I certainly applaud the county, and we're fully behind the county trying to improve this intersection as well as the several others that we've talked about. I don't know if it would make sense to, you know, how the board feels about endorsing either or, because I completely understand Trustee Youngerman's comment about taking homes, but I do know that sometimes that is the best alternative for the entire community. So we've been elected to sit on this board to make tough decisions like that. I'm not saying that I want to. Would it be in our best interest to endorse one of the, evils, or send a letter back to the county that says, we've looked at these and, we think that the best alternative should be the one that is the least impact, or takes the least number of homes, and that's as far as we go on our recommendation. What's the
Then you're endorsing
Steps.
3, right? I mean,
what's that?
then you'd be endorsing 3 without saying it, because that one impacts less homes. My concern is if we don't weigh in and pick one of these options and we leave it to the county, they're well within their rights to pick one, which is the one that I think everyone disagrees with. And again, I agree with President Browley about the taking of homes and things, but if you think back to Orchard Road, I mean, how many homes were acquired for the widening of Orchard Road there? And there was definitely a benefit to that, long-term. And again, I think if we can get rid of the interim road and rework the other one, we're really looking at 2 properties that are apparently in floodplain as it is, correct?
I think part of those lots are, yes.
So I lean towards number 3 just out of default, because I think modified 3 would be where I would be headed.
And I know we're not supposed to look at the cost of these projects, but 3, I hate to throw that in the mix right now. Option 3 is probably significantly more expensive than the other 2. So what does that do for the likelihood that the improvements actually ever happen? Is it, how does, I guess, on a PDR normally, does that happen where they say, you know what, that alternative that we looked at, we liked it, everybody endorsed it, but it's way too expensive for us to do it, so either we never do the project, or do we go back to a different option in phase 2? So,
Which would be perfect, because we really don't want it to do either.
and so that, if they approve the phase 1 with us making whatever recommendation we want, and they can move through and cherry pick the worst of these, hate to simplify it that much, but
If I had to pick an option, I would pick alternative 3, simply because it impacts the least number of homes.
And I would think 3 modified, so we can get rid of the interim road. Move the interim road up onto the other side, where it's already property that's being taken. Put that road there, so that it intersects further up there, maybe not where it currently does, but move it up where it's one of those properties that's already going to be acquired. There's a lot more homes in that cluster that would have access closer to them than it being down on the other stretch.
are they looking for a recommendation tonight?
No.
Should we chew on this a little bit?
I
And
think it would be wise,
Yeah.
and we'll be happy to come back with more specific information if you have something you want us to look at. I would echo the comments. In my opinion, I wouldn't vote for 1 or 3 as they are. If I was going to vote for either one, I would do it for a modified version of either, because I think we can do a lot of good in modifying either one of those alternatives to minimize the impacts to homes. And I think we could probably, 3, I think you can reduce down to 2 homes impacted. I'm not exactly sure on one, how far we can take it. But I'd like to look at that a little closer, so that we would have a better idea about that. So I think it's prudent to give this a little time to distill, because it is, I think, kind of a weighty decision. And we've had several discussions at our staff meeting on this, and there's just not, in my opinion, there's not a clear-cut winner in terms of an alternative. Oftentimes when you're looking at something, there's an obvious winner. And I think the mayor's also correct. You're not supposed to consider cost when you look at alternatives, but, I think you'd kind of be foolish not to a little bit. So I think you have to have that in the back of your mind as well. Because, the days of having unlimited resources to do projects are long gone. So we have to be kind of judicious with our resources, and the county has limited resources as well.
One more question, if I may. in the drawing that represents alternative 3, there's considerable unimproved land to the north. It appears to be farmland or floodplain. Does that fall in the village limits, that property?
Most of it, I believe, is in the village, yes.
Not that this hasn't occurred, but my other encouragement would be to look at this from a community development and a long-range planning perspective as well. There may be some considerations that would guide us more quickly to one solution versus another.
Real briefly, it is obviously within our planning boundaries. Some of it's probably in, some of it's out. The challenge actually for that property is that much of it's in the floodplain, and it's kind of a lower depressional area within that region. So development potential may or may not be limited depending on which property you're talking about. But it could easily be incorporated into, you know, a neighborhood or regional plan.
Okay. Any other burning comments that you would like to make this evening? Otherwise, we can bring this back to a future meeting and kick it around again. Give it some good kicks. All righty. With that, we'll move on to new or unfinished business this evening. Is there any topic you'd like to bring up?
I have.
Hearing none. Oh,
Hearing none. Come on now. Denny just got here, but that's okay. I'd just like to, since we're canceling the meeting on the 20th, on the 25th, the Montgomery PD is going to be hosting the Halloween safety event for kids, some games and hot dogs and food, and I know the PD's been working pretty hard at putting that together, so I think it's 11 to 2, if I'm not mistaken. Some signs have gone out already. And
10 till 2. 10 till 2.
10 to 2, thank you. So just wanted to put that out there because it was a great event last year, and I think it could continue to grow and build to get the kids involved with the police. And it's, as adults, it's worth it just to come out and see the officers in costume because they volunteer their time, and some of them really got into it. Last year we had a Mario. Sergeant Diaz had a big giant 70s afro on, some bell-bottom pants. So it's a lot of fun. So please come out.
you know, I would make one comment. Thanks, Doug. Going back to the Montgomery Road, probably every one of us in this room knows somebody who lives in that area of the S-curve. And over the next few weeks or months, if you could just reach out to the person or people you know live there, let them know that this is something that's going on, because I'm sure they got a mailer probably, and maybe they didn't see it. And if we end up having to pick an alternative, it'd be nice to know that we reached out to them. So.
I'm sorry I'm late coming down, but I went through Madison, got stuck in traffic, and of course Badgers won yesterday. But I also watched Green Bay win again for the 5th straight time. But the Bears look good, Pete.
They suck.
Alrighty.
All right, with that, we'll, you see future meetings. We have a HBC Monday, October 19th. We canceled the committee of the whole, and we do have village board meeting 2 weeks from tonight on October 26th. With that, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for 2 purposes: to discuss collective negotiating matters pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C2, and to discuss litigation which is filed and pending pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C11.
So moved.
Moved by trustee Bond, second by trustee Marisak.
Youngerman.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Bond.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee.
Yes.
Trustee Hines. Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I'll call the meeting back to order and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Youngerman.
Yay.
Trustee Marisak.
Yes.
Trustee Bond.
Yes.
Trustee Spurling.
Yes.
Trustee Lee. Trustee Hines.
And we're adjourned. Thank you.